Hey everybody, Josh Cripps here. Last week I hit 10,000 fans on Facebook. Thank you guys so much. It's a really unbelievable milestone. I'm sort of a shy person. I probably only know like 40 people in real life. So the fact that 10,000 people out there, you guys, have seen my page and liked my photography really means a lot. So anyway, I wanted to do sort of an open-ended interview with you all, and so last week I asked you to send me your questions about photography or travel or adventure or even my favorite bread recipe, and so you guys wrote in a big long list of questions, which I've got here, and I'm going to be going through those right now. Hopefully, give you guys a little bit more insight into what I do and who I am. So let's get down to it right away off the bat. Tons of people wanted to know where the photo was taken that I used for that post. This photo right here that should be popping up right now. So that was taken in a place called Peekaboo Gulch, which is in southern Utah. It's in the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. Really fantastic, neat slot canyon, and yeah, that was a fun sort of self-portrait. Set the timer on the camera, ran up, and just sort of chimneyed up the walls like that to get that photo. Like, anyway, so getting down to the actual questions now. Andrea from Brisbane, Australia wants to know if I considered wearing a kilt during taking of that picture. And Andrea, no, I did not. I don't own a kilt, although I wish I did, because I do a lot of hiking, and it would be great to have that sort of, flexibility when I lift my legs. Although I'm not sure if people would want necessarily to hike with me if I was wearing a kilt, doing a high stepping sort of things like that. But I'm going to invest perhaps in a kilt in the future, so you may be seeing more kilt self-portraits there. Now Jeff from El Cerrito, California has a couple of questions. First, he asks, do your personal favorite photos sell well? And I would say the answer to that is sometimes. In my experience, the photos that sell well are photos that people connect with. In fact, that's the only thing that sells, are photos that people can connect with. And usually that comes from when people have been to a place that's in the photo. So my photos of Yosemite tend to do well because it's a place that a lot of people have been to. It's a place that's very important to a lot of people. And so when, for example, when the photos that are my favorites overlap with that same slice of photos that is of a place that people can connect with, then they sell well. So for example, my best-selling print is a photo of Cathedral Peak. Here it is. And that's actually also one of my favorite photos. Just the time, the lighting, the effort required to get there. It was taken during a wildfire in 2009, so the air is very smoky. You had altitude sickness compounded with the bad air quality. I was very dizzy, and anyway, so it was a lot of trouble and effort to get there and to get that shot. And consequently, it's one of my favorites, but it's also a place a lot of people have been, and they connect with it, and so it sells well. He also asks, do you find that your style has changed since you've been relying on your photography, presumably to make a living? That's a really interesting question. Basically, am I following my own artistic vision, or am I now shooting things that I think will sell? And so far, I feel like mostly I just shoot what I want to shoot. And it just so happens that those places tend to be places and scenes that people are interested in purchasing. So I've been quite lucky with that overlap. Now I do tend to shoot a little bit just for the sake of selling things, but that's traditionally more for like stock photography, or if I get commissioned to do something. So not a complete sellout yet. And he also asks, what is your favorite Ninja Turtle? Now, when I was a kid, I was total nerd, big science and math nerd, and because of that, my favorite Ninja Turtle was Donatello, because he was always the brains of the operation, and he kind of had the plans and the smarts and all that. So, thanks, Jeff. Madison from Sacramento writes, I love bread. Ha ha. What is your favorite bread recipe? And probably my favorite bread recipe is something called beer bread. One, because it's super easy to make and super duper delicious. And I forget the exact recipe off the top of my head, but I believe it is 1 12-ounce bottle of beer, 3 cups flour, 1/4 cup brown sugar, maybe a teaspoon of baking soda, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and then like you just mix all that stuff together, pour it in a 9 by 5 baking dish, and then pour a bunch of melted butter over the top and bake that for about an hour. And it's the most scrumdiddlyumptious bread that you will ever taste, and it's really, really easy. But Google that first, because it's possible that that particular combination of ingredients is actually poisonous, so you might want to get the right quantities from the internet before you try this at home. She asks also, what is the strangest thing you have ever caught on camera, intentionally or otherwise? That's a really interesting question, and I had to think for a long time before I had a good answer to it. My joke answer is anytime I take a self-portrait. But no, the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't think of a strange thing that I had captured, but I kept coming back to a very strange place that I had been, which is the Aleutian Islands, specifically Garraloy Island. I got to spend a summer there in 2009 doing bird research, and I've never been to such a unique place. It was like an island designed by Dr. Seuss. There were these lava flows that had fractured into all of these vertical fingers, and these tiny little seabirds called auklets had colonized that whole area. And so if you can imagine just this serpentine, labyrinthine formation of rock that from the top looked very solid because it was covered with this long, tufty kind of grass. But if you ever stood on top of any of those tufts, you could look down these vertical fissures into the lava, and some of them went down 15, 20 feet. So if you fell in, you were in sort of dire straits. And the little birds, the little auklets were so funny. They had the funniest little calls. They just sounded like little, I don't know, Muppet chickens or something like that. And the island itself was really, really bizarre, with cascading waterfalls, tons of wildflowers. All the pollination was done by flies, not bees. And yeah, so really fascinating place. And if you ever get a chance to go to the Aleutian Islands, I recommend it because it's sort of out of sight. Jesse from Florida now has a heck of a question for me. He writes, I read somewhere that you left the engineering field to pursue photography. True. How often, if ever, do you regret doing that? Well, sometimes. I miss the stability. I miss the income, for sure. I miss silly things like sometimes having a defined schedule is a really nice thing when you just look at your watch and go, you know what, it's 5 o'clock. I'm done for the day. Now my life is mine again. When you work for yourself, you can't do that. You're always on. You're always hustling. You're always trying to get that next step ahead. So I miss things like that. I miss having coworkers actually, because I spend a lot of time by myself. Landscape photography is kind of a lonely business, so I'm out in the field by myself a lot, and then I'm at home processing images, doing marketing stuff, and a lot of that is sort of run solo. So I miss that sort of stuff. He goes on, how uncertain has it been financially versus how rewarding has it been personally? That's a really good question. So yeah, it's always uncertain. I haven't reached a point yet where I can rely on steady source of income, so I'm always scrambling, always hustling for that next thing. There have been multiple times, even within the last 12 months, when I've had less than $200 in the bank. So it's a little nerve-wracking, but it is very, very rewarding personally when on just some random Tuesday I'm out in the Eastern Sierra surrounded by golden aspens, and there's a beautiful sunset erupting or something like that, and I think, a few years ago I would be sitting in a cubicle in LA, and now this is what I'm doing with my Tuesday. So that sort of freedom is pretty powerful. And if you had to ask me, the top 10 sort of motivators or things I want in my life, it's put freedom pretty much at the top of that list. So in that sense, it's extremely rewarding. Has it been detrimental to any of your relationships with your girlfriend, wife, or family? No, not at all. In fact, the girls that I've dated have been very very adventurous themselves, and so the photography has been a fantastic excuse to travel a lot, and sort of help build those relationships. So I've been to Alaska, South Africa, New Zealand, all when I was dating one girl, and since then I've pretty much dated girls who are also into that sort of adventurous type of living. So it's really fantastic. My family's been very supportive. At the moment I am single, so I don't have to worry about that sort of stuff. I always am looking for girlfriend applications though, so if you're interested, send your resume and measurements to girlfriend@joshuacripps.com. How rewarding do you find the art show circuit? Not very, to be the complete honest truth. I love sharing my work with people. I love talking about it. But about 3 or 4 shows into a season, I tell you what, if I have to answer the question, where was this taken, one more time, I'm just about ready to stab my own ears out. But and this year, and it was tough this year. This was one of my worst years doing art festivals, and I've noticed that a steady decline in revenue every year that I've been doing them, and so they're real hit or miss. They're just not reliable, and so I would say they're fun to try, but they're hard to make work. At least for me, that's been my experience. I know other artists are very successful at them, but that's just for me. So hope that gives you some food for thought there, Jesse, and making your own journey into the world of photography. Now from Mitzi from Montesano, Washington. She writes, one lens, what would you choose and why? And I would say rather than pick out a very specific lens, I'll pick out sort of more generally a type of lens, and I would say for me it's all about the ultra wide angle lens. So if you guys are familiar with my photography, which hopefully you are if you're watching this video, I love the sort of bold dynamic compositions that grab the viewer by the eyeballs and sucks them right into the photo. That gives you a real sense of three-dimensionality, like things coming right up to the camera like that. And you get that with a wide angle lens. Also the kind of photography I like to do, the big grand landscape sort of stuff, you need that big wide lens to get the whole picture in view. So that's what I like, Mitzi. I loves me some ultra wide angle lens. Now I got a series of either or questions from you guys. And to start us off, we have Gail from Sunnyvale who writes, if you had to choose to get a better camera and keep your same lenses, or a very nice expensive lens for your older camera, which would you choose and why? And the answer to that is a better lens for my existing camera, hands down. Sort of the better camera you get, the better quality lenses you have to keep up with it. For example, if you go out and you buy yourself a Nikon D800, which has 36 million pixels of detailed goodness, and then put on a shoddy plastic lens on that, you're not taking full advantage of all the detail that you could. So you have to buy lenses to keep up with your camera. And so if you buy a better lens for your old camera, you're going to be sort of eking a little bit extra performance out of that camera, rather than if you put a crappy lens on a good camera, you're going to be pulling the performance of that camera down. Jamie from Phelan, California. You got me feeling pretty good with this question, Jamie. Sunrises or sunsets? Sunsets. Mountains or beaches? Mountains. Favorite place you could never get tired of photographing? 2 places, the Sierra Nevada and New Zealand. You might want some more explanation than that. Sunsets, 1, because I like to sleep in, and 2, they're a little more predictable than sunrises as to whether or not there's going to be color. Mountains, I was born and raised in the mountains. That's where my heart is at, and that's what I love. Now, for me, the most beautiful places on earth are Sierra Nevada and New Zealand, and there's an infinite amount of stuff to shoot there. So yeah, I don't think I could ever get tired of either of those places. Thanks, Jamie. Mark S. with a very important question here. Banana bread, with nuts or without? And definitely without. Now don't get me wrong, I love nuts, just not on my bread. Alright, now we got a doozy of a question from David from Kalispell, Montana. He asks, what advice would you give to someone wanting to make the jump to full-time photography? And this is probably the million-dollar question that everybody wants. How do I make that jump? And my advice to you is actually don't do it. Well, that's not true. What I would say is don't romanticize it. Don't think that it's going to be something that it's not. You really have to think about what you want in your life and what it means to go pro. So it doesn't mean that you're out every single day in the field taking photos. It means that you get to go take photos, but then you have the freedom to go take those photos, but then you have to turn those photos into income, right? Nobody pays me to go take photos, so it's a little disingenuous to say that I'm a photographer. Rather, I take the photos sort of on speculation, and then I find a market for them, right? Either stock or licensing or art festivals, prints, teaching workshops actually is a real good one. Um, and so what you're doing when as a pro photographer 90% of the time is actually doing business stuff. And so if you don't want that, if you don't want to turn this thing that you love into a business where you have to constantly make it work, right? You don't really get to take any time off. It's not just purely about enjoyment of photography, but it's about leveraging those photos and your skills into a marketable resource. And so if you don't want that transformation, then don't go pro. I would say keep your job and then just enjoy the photography in a very pure sense. And I think the reason that it works for me doing photography full time is that I love the process of building something. And so I feel very much like I'm building this thing for myself, even though I'm not doing photography all the time, even though a lot of it is marketing and editing photos and contacting clients, doing accounting. Sometimes even the accounting is fun because I'm building it for myself. I'm not putting my energy into somebody else's projects. I'm putting all my energy, I'm investing it in myself. So that's very cool. That's probably the coolest aspect about being full-time photographer is you're investing in yourself entirely. But it's very hard and it's very difficult to make a living doing landscape photography in particular, and it does sometimes take some of the enjoyment out of photography when you instead of just being a purely desire-driven thing. Oh, I want to go take photos, I want to edit this image, it's I have to go take photos, I have to edit this image. So it's a little bit of a skew on there. So think about that sort of before you decide that you want to try to go pro. The other thing that you should really keep in mind is that I think there's this illusion out there that you flip a light switch and all of a sudden you are now a full-time photographer, and it's not like that. It takes a tremendous amount of time and transition to go from starting to sell a few photos into that's sort of a trickle of a revenue source into actually turning that into a stream that you can support yourself with. And that was the mistake that I made when I first started. Oh, I sold a few $100s worth of prints at an art festival, therefore I can extrapolate this and do it full time. Well, it's a huge transition. For me, it's been a 5+ year transition to go from those first few meager sales to actually having a sort of sustainable income stream from that I can pay my bills with. So think about all that kind of stuff before you decide to make that leap. Daniel B. writes in and he says, when you're out hiking and camping, do you carry your own gear? Absolutely. One, I can't hire an assistant, nor do I think I would want to. I like that satisfaction of hoofing my own stuff, 8 miles into the backcountry up a 3,000-foot pass to get to this amazing place. It's a reward. You earn it. You earn that experience. You earn those photos. So I always carry my own gear. If you're going to backpack for a few days, what lens or lenses would you take? I always have a flexibility, weight, dirt collection dilemma. So for me, it's about priorities, right? Think about what kind of photos you're really hoping to get out of a trip and bring the best kit for those photos. If you go into a backpacking trip as a generalist and say, oh, well, what if I want to take some portraits in the backcountry? And what if I want to take some landscape photos? And what if I want to take some wildlife photos? Well, all of a sudden you've got 12 pounds of lenses and 2 bodies and all this stuff. It's totally for me, I'm a landscape guy. I know that I want to come out of any trip with landscape photos. So what do I bring? I bring my ultra wide angle landscape lens, some filters. I bring my tiny little 50mm prime, which weighs it's so light it probably buoys my pack up, and just bring the bare minimum possible to get the kind of photos that I want to get. So bear that in mind on your next trip. Just think about your priorities and go for those. Brian T. from Cincinnati writes, what's the most awesome place you've ever traveled, and where would you still like to visit? So my favorite place in the world is New Zealand. I've been there 5 times, and I just keep going back. I'm totally addicted, and I would give it a 97% chance that I'll end up living there at some point in my life. Super beautiful. The people are really friendly. Really like the vibe of the whole country. One of the other really amazing places I visited was Mongolia. not as a photographer, just as a traveler. That place was incredibly surprising. It was like taking a step, not back in time, but out of time, because the lifestyle that you could see out in the countryside was the same as it was 50 years ago or 500 years ago, this nomadic lifestyle. Now they have, you know, motorbikes and Jeeps, but essentially it's the same lifestyle. Really fascinating place. Where would I still like to visit? As I said, New Zealand, going back there as many times as I can get. Right now, really high on the radar are Madagascar and the Andes in Peru. Not necessarily Machu Picchu, which I'm sure it's amazing, but it is highly visited, and I kind of like to go more off the beaten track. But there are two mountain ranges in the Andes that I would like to visit, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce them because I'm sure I will butcher them. But needless to say, they're amazing. You guys want to see a magic trick? I'm now wearing sleeves. Wow, continuity error. Anyway, it started to get real dark last night as I was filming it, so I had to take a break until the morning, but it's cold out this morning, so under sleeves. Anyway, let's get back to it. I know for you guys, no time has passed at all, but for me, it's been like 10 hours, so let's warm up here. Let's get going. The next question, which is another big question, comes from Susan B. And she says, my son-in-law's photos are truly amazing. I asked him if he'd mind if I used them to print, frame, and sell for him. But now I'm thinking, I've never sold even any of my work, so how do I go about putting a price on his? How do I make this jump from making art to selling it? Do you think I'd have to do the art fairs or just have a gallery online? And prices, any ideas? You did the science end and then jumped to the art and business end. How did you achieve it? Thanks. Sorry this is so long. Thanks, Susan. This is a great question, and I think a lot of people struggle with this. How do you go from doing this thing that you love to do and actually starting to make money from it? And then once, you know, how do you figure out the practicalities of it, like you said, pricing and things like that? So what it all comes down to in terms of selling your work or your son-in-law's work or anybody's work is visibility. You've got to get it out there so people can see it. So it's all about marketing. And for me, the art festivals were a good way to do that, and a real easy and obvious way, because you just pay the promoter to show up, and then they bring in all the customers. So that's a real good way to get a lot of eyes on your work or your son-in-law's work. An online gallery is great, but personally, I've had very little luck selling from my website unless it's to people I already know or people I met at art festivals. I think given the nature of photography, people want to actually behold the prints in person to get a feel for how they're going to look up on the wall rather than looking at a little, 4-inch rectangle on their computer screen and trying to imagine what it's going to look like in a 4-foot wide print above their fireplace. So I've had the most luck so far selling to people in person. You should probably have a website. That way you can direct people to it if you don't have any of your actual work with you. So it's all about visibility and marketing, and I am not an expert on that by any means, but I would maybe take a class from a local community college about marketing and that sort of thing, because really that's what it comes down to. You have to get people to see your work. The actual venue probably doesn't matter as much as the fact that you need people to actually get eyes on your stuff. Let's see what else she asked. Prices. Yeah, this is a great question that a lot of photographers have starting out, is how do I price my work? Well, there's a lot of chatter on this on the internet, but hopefully I can give you some practical considerations that'll make your life a little bit easier. Let's say as a starting point, take whatever it costs you to produce it. So if you're doing framed stuff, the cost of the print, the cost of the mat, the cost of the frame, everything that you need to do to have a final saleable piece, and multiply that by 3. That way you cover your costs, you cover what you need for tax and things like that, and then you make a little bit extra on top. So a factor of 3 is a good place to start. Then you can modify that a little bit based on things like your reputation. If you have a really fantastic reputation with a lot of acclaim, you've been published in different magazines, then you can raise that price up a little bit. If you're just starting out, you might want to just keep it right at that multiplier of 3 factor. You can also look around at other artists to see kind of what they charge, other photographers who shoot the same style of stuff, and compare yourself to them. You know, if you go out and you say, okay, my photography is as good as Peter Lick's, therefore I'm going to charge $10,000 for a print. Well, that only works if you have a name as recognizable as Peter Lick. So you have to take all that stuff into account, the quality of your work, your reputation, and all that sort of stuff. And that will sort of help you go from that factor 3 multiplier and find the right spot for your prices. The other thing that I want to emphasize with selling your work as far as pricing and the art festivals go is that people will only take you as seriously as you take yourself. So when I first started doing art festivals, I had the most rinky-dink display you can imagine. It was all handmade. It was basically the bare minimum I needed to get accepted into an art festival. It did not look very good. And so people came up and they looked at it, and they, you know, that immediately forms this impression of how they saw me as a professional artist. And it was really a reflection of how I saw myself as a professional artist. And what you want people to buy your work because they respect you as an artist, because they look at your work, it looks professional, it looks incredible, and any display you have, if you do an art festival, that's also got to look really, really professional. And when I first started getting going, I think what my booth said was not buy work from me because you respect me, but buy work from me because you pity me. And that's a really hard hole to dig yourself out of. So if you're going to start going in the art festival circuit, I would say invest in the absolute top of the line display that you can, and make sure that your display, your pieces, your prints, everything is as professional and high quality as you can make it, because like I said, people are going to respect you as an artist as much as you respect yourself. So if you present yourself in a very professional way, then people will take you in a very professional way, and it'll be easier to sell art to those folks. Hope that helps, Susan, and that gives you some basis to bounce off of into your own art sales there in the future. Okay, Wanda K from Cookeville, Tennessee writes, what camera body and lenses do you use, and what's your favorite software? Right now, Wanda, I shoot with a Nikon D7000, which is used to be sort of the top of the line in the prosumer market for Nikon, and it's actually what I'm filming this video with right now. But it's an amazing camera, fantastic image quality, great detail. For what I do for landscapes, it's fantastic. The crop format of the sensor gives me a little bit extra added depth of field for any given aperture and lens, and so, or I should say aperture and focal length. And so I really like that because, like I said, I love those grand landscapes that are tack sharp from front to back. So with that crop sensor, I can get that. It does have some limitations. The handling is a little cheesy. I wish there were dedicated buttons for things like ISO and quality and white balance, but there aren't. But that's a minor quibble. Let's see, lenses. I use a Tokina 12-24 f4 lens. That's been my workhorse lens since I bought it in 2006. I really love it. The only downside to it is it's kind of soft in the corners, so especially with the higher detail you get, like as I noticed as I upgraded from a D50, which was a 6 megapixel camera, to a D300, D300S, which is a 12, to the D7000, which is a 16 megapixel camera, is I can see that corner sharpness or corner softness increasing with each successive increase of detail. When I zoom into 100%, I can see the flaws in the lens in that corner. So I do wish that it had a little bit better performance in the corners, but other than that, it's a fantastic lens. That's what I use 90% of the time. I also have, I have a 50mm prime and a 70-200 f2.8 lens that I use for shooting wildlife in those like rare instances once every 4 years when an animal crosses my path. And my favorite software? Well, I'm a Photoshop guy, and I've been doing Photoshop since I was in college, so going on about 10 years now. And I got started doing it just for fun, for doing some stupid geeky web design stuff in college, and so it just kind of came along the whole way with me, and it just led naturally to to me doing photography. That's my cat, Scout Finch. She doesn't accompany me on my adventures, but I think that she would like to. Right. Anyway, so thanks, Wanda. All right. Rachel O has two questions. First, she asks, what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? What do you mean? An African or European swallow? She also asks, any plans to photograph the aurora borealis? And I have to say right now, I don't have any plans per se to photograph the aurora borealis, but if I woke up tomorrow and I was in Fairbanks or, Banff or something like that, I would definitely not say no to doing it. But for me personally, it's not high on my list of things to shoot, especially because as the quality of high ISO performance of cameras keep getting better and better. More and more folks are going out and doing night photography, which is very cool. It's opening up an entire new avenue of landscape photography, but at the same time, I feel like the online photo sharing sites are starting to get bombarded by aurora pictures. And I look at the aurora the same way I kind of look at pretty sunsets and reflections. Like, you can put them in your photo and well, let me back up. So if you have those things in your photos, a lot of photographers tend to sort of have a lazy approach to their photos when they have a really vivid sunset or a great reflection or the aurora borealis, and that they think that gets rid of any and all obligation to have a compelling composition or to think about their their photograph from a more aesthetically complete standpoint. So a lot of times I'll see these really incredibly vivid aurora pictures, lots of green curtains and magenta shimmers, and absolutely no composition in the foreground. And you see that a lot with those other things, reflections as well, and like I said, vivid sunsets. So I think those elements are a crutch in a sense. They tend to make a lot of photographers lazy about the rest of their photography, and so I don't have any plans to shoot the aurora right now, just because I feel like there's so much aurora stuff happening online that people are starting to get a little bit saturated with it. And I dropped my question sheet. Alrighty, there we go. Anyway, hope that answered the question. Wayne from Australia, g'day Wayne, writes, are there any must-see places in Europe and your favorite cake recipe? I'm a pastry chef, LOL. So that second question first, I don't know if I've ever baked a cake in my entire life. And if I have, it's probably from one of those Betty Crocker, cake mixes where you add an egg and some oil and chuck it in the oven. So sorry to disappoint you there, Wayne, but I'm really not a chef in any stretch of the imagination. So I do love carrot cake and chocolate cake, though. Anyway, and as for must-see places in Europe, I actually haven't photographed there. So I've been there, and I actually lived in Lithuania for about 9 months back in 2004 going on to 2005. So if there are any Lithuanians out there, labas. So I would say, yeah, go to Vilnius in Lithuania. That place really captured my heart. As for photography, just based on what I've seen online, I would say check out Plitvice, which is this amazing falls in Croatia with this emerald kind of travertine pools and these series of cascades. The Alps, the Dolomites, which are part of the Alps, I think. Italians, please correct me on that if I'm wrong. Where else? I think that the Mont Blanc Traverse in France is supposed to be pretty spectacular. And there's also a church in the Czech Republic that is made entirely out of bones. That's interesting. Bones from people who died of the plague back in the Dark Ages. So, hope that gives you something to go on. I don't know. Oh, Isle of Skye in Scotland is supposed to be quite spectacular as well. And the fjords of Norway, of course. But this is all just secondhand stuff. I've never been to any of these places except the Bone Church and Lithuania. So, anyway, have fun when you go over there, Wayne. Okay, Tony D. Tony D. It sounds like a mobster name. It's pretty cool. Hello from Manitoba, Canada. Do you ever wish to make the switch to medium format? Well, yes and no. I would love to have a little bit extra detail, especially because recently I've had a couple of requests for really, really high quality, high resolution images. Actually, just 2 days ago, a woman called me because they were looking to make a 40-foot wide print for a storefront, and she needed a photo to fit that bill. And so yeah, the 16 megapixels that I'm shooting with now work pretty well for most applications. Making prints up to about 4 feet wide, it's totally fine. But anything bigger than that, it would be nice to have that extra detail. Now, the reason that I don't particularly care about going to medium format, one is that I don't want to have to carry all that extra weight around. You know, the bigger camera, bigger lens, bigger tripod, you're just compounding your weight. I like to do a lot of backpacking, and it's awesome to go light and go fast. And the other thing is that I feel like you get into this dog chasing its tail kind of loop where you go, okay, now I've got a medium format camera, so I need to get a better computer to process those medium format images, and now I've got a better computer so I can do more crazy stuff like stitched medium format panoramas to generate, you know, 500 megapixel images. Oh, but now I need to buy more RAM for the computer, and blah blah blah, and you just kind of just get this endless cycle. And so I feel like far better than chasing this dream of, oh, if only I had this camera, then I would do XYZ. Just, you know, be happy with what you've got. So for me, I'm very, very, very happy with my Nikon D7000. As I said, it produces amazing quality images, and I've sold lots of prints using this camera. I've even sold lots of prints using a Nikon D50, which is sort of a joke of a camera by today's standards. But if you know how to use your equipment, you can produce great images, even if they're you know, low resolution. So anyway, that's pretty much it, how I feel about medium format there. Tyler from Michigan's Upper Peninsula writes, oh, excuse me, Tony D had a second question. Have you ever photographed anywhere in Canada yet? Not seriously. When I first got my first SLR, that Nikon D50, back in 2006, I flew up to Alaska and bought a car, which is actually the car that I still drive. It's my Jeep Cherokee, which the letter J fell off the front, so now it's an Eep Cherokee. And drove around Alaska, and then this was in October. This was actually almost exactly 7 years ago. So drove around Alaska for a couple of weeks in October, and then drove down the Alcan. And so we drove through British Columbia on the way back and did some photography, but at the time I had no idea what I was doing with my camera. I didn't know my aperture from a hole in the ground, so I don't really have any good photos to show from that trip, but it was a really marvelous experience. Like, we got caught in Smithers right before this huge winter storm when it snowed 24 inches in 24 hours. And so we had lots of really fascinating experiences like that, but no real photographs. But it's on my list to head back there. I would love to get up into the Canadian Rockies, of course, and up in the Yukon Territory. There are some really remote, fantastic places that Galen Rowell shot, one called the Cirque of the Unclimbables. I would love to go there and check that out. Sort of like far north Yosemite, I think. Anyway, thanks, Tony. Tyler from Michigan's Upper Peninsula writes, do you think mirrorless cameras will take over DSLRs in the future? And I think they will. I think they absolutely will. I mean, the quality of those cameras is already increasing, and as the technology improves, both the hardware of the sensor and the software for the processing, I think it's only a matter of time before the image quality is comparable to what we have now with DSLRs. For me, the main thing, and that sort of is preventing me from making any sort of switch, is that I love composing looking through a viewfinder. I love the direct optical input. Like when I have to compose using live view or something like that, I can't do it. I don't know what it is, but it just doesn't work for me. Not to mention in bright sunny conditions or backlit conditions or things like that, that viewfinder can be really, really hard to see. So once those mirrorless cameras have a bright enough, clear enough digital viewfinder to actually replace the optical one, I think that's going to be a huge step forward for people like myself who like to compose looking through that optical viewfinder. But yeah, I love the idea of a tiny little camera body this big that weighs a few ounces with a tiny little lens that's mostly plastic, you know, that you can basically chuck in your bag, and it's half the weight of an SLR, and it takes incredible quality pictures. Yeah, who wouldn't want that? As long as the control's still there, you know, to get the aperture and shutter speed and ISO and white balance. That's the main thing, is you want that creative control. So if that's there and the quality's there, yeah, I think it's inevitable before that stuff is going to sort of take off. It's getting cold out here. My nose is probably getting really Rudolph red. That's like a thermometer. It's a built-in thermometer. You can, based on the color of red of my nose, you can tell how cold it is. So it's probably like 60 degrees out here right now. And when it gets like neon red, it's gone down to about 40 degrees. All right, now our last question is from Grace from Port Moody, British Columbia, Canada, and she writes, do you really think being a photographer is the right decision for you? Can you make enough money to make a living? And to answer that second question first, yeah, you can make enough money to make a living, and I'm doing that. I feel very, very fortunate to be able to do that. Landscape photography is one of the hardest disciplines within photography to make a living at, and so I feel incredibly fortunate to be doing that. Now, I can sort of get away with it because I am single, I don't have any kids, I'm not married, I have an old car that I own outright, I live out in the country in a place where cost of living is very low, so my bills are very low. And I also don't try to spend a lot of money, because here's the way I see it. The only real currency that you've got in your life is the amount of time that you've got. So I like to think of what I have to spend in terms of minutes and seconds rather than dollars and cents. And in my opinion, the only thing that's really worth spending your dollars, brain's not working this morning. The only thing that's worth spending your minutes and seconds on are experiences. And at the end of your days, you're going to be looking back on your life and you're going to go, man, I just am so glad I bought that 57-inch TV in 2007. Or you're going to look back and say, I'm so glad that I had a chance to visit Madagascar. I remember what it was like to step off that plane and smell that air wafting across me and to see a little sifaka bouncing across the tarmac. That's the sort of stuff that's going to enrich your life and that you're going to remember at the end of your days. Not, oh man, the iPhone 5 was so awesome. I'm so glad that I stood in line for 24 hours to get one. And so I try not to buy a lot of stuff, but rather if I have a little bit of money, I'd rather take $50, put a tank of gas in my car, and zip off and go backpacking or camping for 4 days or something like that. So that's how it works for me. That's why I'm able to make enough money to go ahead and live off of photography. And I do feel incredibly fortunate to be doing that. As to whether or not it's the right decision for me, the answer for me is absolutely yes it is. I think for a lot of people it's not, because when you take this thing that you love and you turn it into a business, it sort of distorts the enjoyment of the purely artistic process. So for a lot of people, I think it's better to keep photography as a completely purely artistic endeavor that they enjoy as an escape from the grind of their daily life or the grind of their job. But for me, I love the freedom that it affords me to when I am doing this for myself. So right now as I'm recording this, it's 10:56 on some random Wednesday morning. And if I wanted to right now, I could get in my car and drive to Utah or Wyoming or Montana. I could get on a plane and fly to New Zealand if I really wanted to. And so I don't have to clear that with anybody. I can just get up and go and do it. And the amount of freedom the feeling of freedom that comes from that is, for me, just the most incredible reward that there is. So for me, absolutely, it was the right decision. It's a ton of hard work. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, there's a lot of stuff I miss about having a stable 9-to-5 job, but the trade-off has absolutely been worth it to be able to go down this path and to reach out to so many people and share my vision of the world and the beauty of the world as I see it with so many people. That's really incredible as well. So yeah, I love it, and I'm going to keep doing that for as long as I can. As long as I've got legs to walk and a finger to press the shutter button, I'm going to be doing landscape photography. So that's it. That's all the questions. I want to thank you guys again for writing in. That was really fun for me to answer those. I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, good job. You're a trooper. And I will be seeing you guys around the way on Facebook, on my website, or maybe in person on a workshop or something like that. So very much appreciated you guys. Have a great day, and we'll talk soon. Bye. Your mama says, eat some bread. Anytime I take a boogaboo, boogaboo, one land, blah, 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 blah. Boy, I'm really screwing this one up.